Now, farmers are under increasing pressure. We certainly know that. And as these changes in society, technology, and climate leave them questioning their role as the producers of our food. And it is very worrying. The challenges are the challenges are in making the right decisions for their own well-being and producing food that modern consumers demand. All of this demand on them all at once, and is that overwhelm that we spoke about. Now, joining us now to discuss his 2019 Nuffield Scholar report after he spoke this week with Farmers Weekly journalist Richard Rennie. You can get the full story now online, is Corrigan Sowman. Welcome to Sarah's Country, out of a dairy shed in Golden Bay.
Yeah, hi Sarah, how are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. Firstly, doing your Nuffield Scholarship it's a true honour, isn't it, in anyone's life to be able to travel around the world. Yet a lot of your report focuses on here at home. I'm sure that there was a lot of research studying the pressures on farmers abroad. What did you find out about that type of thing abroad, and how did it lead you back to some of the lessons that we have here right on our doorstep?
Yeah, okay, Sarah. So you're absolutely right. Some of the focus of my report it's probably particularly sort of pertinent to New Zealand is this concept of the All Blacks. But the 18 weeks I spent overseas last year was initially looking at the global food picture that we're all talking about and the change that's occurring in it. And during that sort of initial period, I was particularly in the US and Europe and South America. I saw farmers under a lot of pressure, and they didn't necessarily express it in those terms, but there was changes going on for them that were unusual, and I found that really interesting. So subsequent to that initial time overseas, I came back and sort of started to collect my thoughts and went back overseas to dig into the subject of provenance a bit more, which is where I originally started with the Nuffield. And as I explored that subject, I found frustrated and sometimes angry farmers in interviews, and I was really interested in why they were feeling like they were feeling. And in an interview with a Nuffield scholar actually in Ireland, Bill O'Keefe, he referenced the All Blacks book called Legacy by James Kerr. And he said, Corrigan, you need to go away and read that book, because I think a lot of what you're trying to articulate in this interview, you'll find in there. So I went home reading the book and discovered Kerry Evans, who's a forensic psychologist here in New Zealand, and was one of the principal supporters and coaches, I suppose, to the All Blacks after their loss in the 2007 World Cup, when they did the internal review and said, okay, well, why were we in the situation we were in that quarterfinal with France? And so I was very fortunate, Sarah, that Kerry was just writing a book called Perform Under Pressure. And he has this concept of defining pressure, which he talks about as uncertainty and high stakes and small margins. And they're all things that as farmers we can absolutely relate to. And then he brings in this concept of judgment, which I think is very real. And your show mentions that quite regularly with some of the people you interview. And he also talks about fast change. And if there's anything that we've all witnessed in the last sort of 10 to 12 weeks across the world, is fast change. So Kerry's definition of pressure gave me a foundation to then get back out globally and try and unpick that. And I headed to the US for a start, thinking, well, 325 million people, a couple of million farmers, massive food industry, they're going to have some good knowledge on farmer psychology. I didn't find much. And actually, I didn't find a lot on farmer psychology in the world. And the power, I suppose, of Kerry's book is it constantly kept bringing me back to something that I could relate to, and that I thought New Zealand farmers would be able to relate to. And really what I was trying to say is that, well, there's a lot of issues across the world and pressure in agriculture. It's the issues here at home around pressure that are particularly important. So, yeah, that's the background.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for going down this path. It's something that is a huge untalked about part of our sector. Rural mental health has certainly got a lot of attraction over the last 5 years, of course, with John Kirwan and Doug Avery and leading forward. But I mean, where forward can we ensure that some of these key lessons can become part of our general farming conversations in terms of looking after ourselves to look after others? You know, the old put your face mask on first before you put anybody else's on.
Yeah, so the problem I've been trying to explore, Sarah, is I thought when I started out on the Nuffield Scholarship was a technical problem around, as I mentioned earlier, around provenance and how we sell our food. And what I quickly discovered, and a number of my colleagues that were also Nuffield Scholars last year also identified, is that the social problems were actually the real issues. And so we're starting to unpick the social problem, but the goal with my report was to try and explore what is that interface between the technical problems we have, like water quality, like how do we move ourselves up the value chain, like how do we deal with the social license challenges that we have, with the social interface of how do we feel as a farmer, particularly when we're being judged and someone doesn't have all the facts. How does that, what situation does that put our family in, perhaps one that might have been in the district for a long time and have a representation, a role as part of the community and a reputation, and suddenly we don't feel we have that identity. And that issue is global. And so the wellbeing things that you mentioned with John Kirwan or Doug Avery or the excellent work that FarmStrong's done, my goal with my bit was not to take anything away from that, but perhaps to just try and unpick it and untease it a little bit more about where does that technical and social thing really fit for farmers, because so many of these issues we're hearing right now coming from our government and our society as a whole, they always come back to being technical issues. How do we farm, and what's the food that we're trying to produce going to look like to the rest of the world, or how does it meet the changing needs of the consumer? But the reality is at the foundation of where that food came from and where our sector is as a person. And that if we really want to make change in a way that's constructive both for New Zealand food as a whole, but also for the people that are part of our communities, then we've got to focus around wellbeing first.
Absolutely. I'm a huge advocate for humanising food production. Corrigan, just to end, you could not live in a bigger fishbowl than dairy farming in Golden Bay. Well, I know from my speaking to Wayne Langford around that, and I'm sure you have your own personal stories. How have you learned from those pressures?
Yeah, and look, I have to be very honest and say that was one of the drivers of doing the Nuffield and furthering myself. Our dairy farm straddles each side of the main road that goes into Golden Bay, and for anyone familiar, it's a one-way road. So we call our farm the fishbowl of Golden Bay Dairying, and I also operate a farm that is on the recharge zone of Te Waikurapupu Springs, which is also incredibly important taonga for our local iwi, but for New Zealand and tourism as a whole. So I'm acutely aware of the realities of farming and what it can mean to you as a person.
Oh, Corrigan, thank you so much for your wonderful Nuffield Scholar report. You can check that out and have a full read of his report at ruralleaders.co.nz. And, of course, a summarised version, thanks to Richard Rennie, Farmers Weekly journalist on farmersweekly.co.nz under the title around, I've just lost it, All Blacks. Oh, it's gone. But thank you. So All Blacks thinking tackles stress. Have a look at that article.
This is Sarah's Country.